Hey guys, Reg Edit back in town. Today we're looking at the Sub 37. Going to have a bit of a walkthrough and show you a few patch ideas, so stick around. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell so you'll get notified when I upload my next video. In the meantime, let's get on with the video. Hey guys, so here we are with the Sub 37. I'm going to run you through the basic controls, starting from the left to right, but I'm going to leave out this programming area. I'm going to come back to that later on. So starting with the second thing from the left hand side is the arpeggiator. So you've got octaves ups and octaves down by using this button here. This dial here will basically give you your tempo, but when this button here is engaged, this will act as divisions, as that will be used to sync to a DAW or something else that's sending MIDI clock. So you use that sync button. You can also use it as a tap tempo if you've got a beat going and you want to get into a groove live on stage. That's where you can literally tap in a tempo. But remember, you have to have it off to use it. It's just to tap it in, because when it's on, it's going to be synchronized to the DAW and you won't get anything to happen at all. So just be aware of that if you don't get any sound out of it when you first get your Sub 37. I know I did. Anyway, moving on. So this is your octaves. It moves from 1 to 2 octaves up and 1 to 2 octaves down. Underneath that you've got a back and forth control, which gives a bit of a variation to your arpeggiators. It's got an invert. You can use them both together, and you get different variations when you're using them. You get the gist of that. So underneath that, this is your on and off button and your latch to latch it on. So if you don't want to, for hands-free. Okay, so on the same panel here is the sequencer option. It's got a 64-step sequencer built into it, and to access the sequencer, you literally turn the knob to where it says sequence, SEQ, and turn it on. There's no sequence in it at the moment, so to record a sequence, you literally turn it to record. So put in a few notes. And to see the notes that you've put in, you hold down bank and press latch. And now you can see this strip of notes, and you realise you've put 14 steps in. So if you wanted to make it 16, add another 2 steps in now. And to play it, we turn this knob back to sequence. Press the on button, and now pressing a note. So it just gives a little bit of more variation to it as well. You can swing the sequencer, but you have to go into the panel options here. So let's go, using these arrow buttons, go down to where it says back, press the cursor button, and now we're using the arpeggiators. So we scroll up 1, press the cursor, and now we're into the arpeggiator. Here we can decide what we want for the gate length. You can have it 100% open. To almost nothing. And you can modulate that as well, so that's quite cool. We've got clock divisions, which will take you from your standard 16ths to 4th triplets, dotted notes, your standard stuff. Again, to get out of this, scroll down 1 more and click on back and then hit the cursor button. It's a little bit fiddly, this menu, and that's why a lot of people don't get into it, but I showed you these options in there because they really do help when you're using the sequencer to program something in. So let's move on. So next to that, we've got a glide. Let's just get a little sound that the glide's going to sound nice with. So it's standard stuff with the glide again, turning it to the right and switching it on. We'll give it a longer slide. And turn it to the left will obviously make it shorter, quicker. Transition. you've got the option to slide oscillator 1 or oscillator 2 by using this button underneath. You can choose them both to slide, or just one oscillator, which is really cool for getting different transitions. And that's leaving oscillator 2 unaffected by the glide. If I choose oscillator 2, that's leaving oscillator 1 unaffected by the glide. I'm going to tune in the oscillator 2's frequency. So there's plenty of uses for that. Other options on the glide are LCR, LCT and EXP, and they're kind of just different expressions of how they play. One will basically give an equal amount of glide no matter whereabouts on the keyboard you play. Another one will give a longer stretch. So for example, this is the LCR. Now this again is affecting both oscillators, and you can change it between 1 or 2, but I've got both oscillators being affected by the glide. This is LCT. So no matter whereabouts on the keyboard I play, the glide time is still going to be the same. So it kind of, it's going to be a long glide, even though it's, you know, your distance between notes is shorter. Moving on to the EXP. This one doesn't sound as good, but when you use it in conjunction with the gated option, which is what I want to come to now, when you use the gate, no matter where you hit on the keyboard, when the glide's still happening, it will continue on. So that's a cool little effect for slides. And you know, it's great when you're playing like hi-hat patterns and stuff like that. You get some interesting effects. And then you've got your legato mode, which will so if you hold the notes legato, they slide that way. So moving on to the modulation matrix, these two basically are exactly the same. The modulation one is defaulted to the modulation wheel, but you can assign it to kind of pretty much anything else you want. But just remember that it's defaulted to that. Let's start an initialized patch. So to do that again, press the initialized button here. When it defaults, oscillator 1 is always a little bit quiet, but that's cool. These oscillators sound fantastic. You've got your standard shapes between triangle, square, sawtooth, reverse sawtooth, sample and hold. And then we've got something called FEG and PGM. FEG basically transmits the modulation to filter 1 here, and you can use these pots to create your own curves, so it gives you more of an interesting LFO rather than just sticking with your standard shapes here. High range takes you into past audio rate. Let's work on LFO 1 because they're both the same, and as I said, this is affected by the modulation wheel. So if you use mod 2, you don't have to use the modulation wheel to bring it in, it will just work straight away. Where if you're using the modulation section, when you turn the wheel, anything you do in this area will be affected. So your controller for mod 1 is going to be the modulation wheel here. So hardwired in is pitch amount and filter amount. So again, depending what shape you choose. Sample and hold. can be synced as well, so that's cool. And again, we've got the FEG PGM. When you click on that, this will make filter 1 your modulator, determined by the amount you drive into it. So the amount of pitch is there, but you're affecting the pitch curve by using this filter envelope here. When you use that FPGM, the FEG. When you use the PGM, that is when you're going to be using another controller apart from the LFOs and stuff like that, and you set them up in this programming area. But I'm going to do another video on that because it's quite complicated, and I don't want this video to get too boring. So pitch amount, as I said, hardwired in. Filter amount, you've got keyboard reset, so that will reset the LFOs. Instead of it going through its cycle when you're playing, it will reset as the beginning of the point of the LFO when it hits. Sync will basically sync these LFOs to the incoming MIDI clock if you're using it from a DAW or from the main internal clock. I will say this synthesizer synchronizes amazingly. I use Cubase and it works with the Digitact. It just everything. The clock is fantastic, unlike some other products that I won't be mentioning today. Anyway, moving on. You've got some hardwired options here underneath here, which have already been pre-programmed, but you can reroute those any way you want. You've got oscillator 1 wave, you've got VCA level, LFO 1 rate, oscillator 2 wave, noise level, and envelope time and PGM. So when you're using the PGM up here, you select that option when you go into it. But again, I'm going to come back to that video because that's quite complicated. The modulation amount is to dial in the amount for whichever one of these modulations you've selected. So I've got, for argument's sake, if I was to put on noise level, the oscillator noise, and again the overall noise of it, even if the oscillator's down, you can always override it because you chose to modulate the oscillator of the noise generator. First, oscillator 1. So you've got your octave switch here and your wave selector there. It will literally choose a triangle, a saw, a square, and a pulse wave, and you can choose anywhere in between that with this knob. Oscillator 2 is exactly the same. You've got a hard sync button which syncs oscillator 1 and oscillator 2 together. Let's turn oscillator 2 on so you can hear what I'm saying. And this, you affect this by using the frequency knob here. So you get that classic hard syncing sound. Keyboard reset will basically, every time you hit a note, we'll reset it. We'll reset the oscillator to its initial point. As they're analog waves, they can be drifting along, and so sometimes you might not want that static stuff, but for percussive sounds and stuff, we want that on. For drums and kind of clicky basses. Low and high button here will basically, when in duo mode, we'll choose which oscillator you want. So I'll give you a demonstration of the duo mode. To kind of choose those chords by this frequency knob really here. We've got the mixer section now, so basically oscillator 1, you've got a sub oscillator which will layer another oscillator underneath oscillator 1, determined by the octave amount. So let's put oscillator 1, playing the sub oscillator. That's with it. I don't know if you can hear that on your phones, but there's no pitch control for that. It literally just will layer 1 octave under. know, it's good for definitely what it does on the tin sub. Oscillator 2 is the same as oscillator 1. We've got a noise oscillator, a noise generator as well. Classic percussive sounds, effects, that kind of thing. You've got keyboard feedback and external in underneath that. Now this, if you've got something plugged into the back of it, it will this will be the volume, the pot to bring that in. If you haven't, it will bring a feedback back into the section again, so that toughens your sounds up. So it just gives you more drive. I mean, there's loads of drive on this. That's why I love it so much. You know. So let's move over to the filter. We've basically got 4 slopes for the filter, so imagine it's like a chop EQ on a mixer, on an EQ. Going to the 12, it just takes a little bit of it off, you know, so it's not as harsh. Moving down again, so your 24 BD, you know, your 24 dB is going to be, you know, your lowest. So for your low end sounds, again you won't hear them on there. So that's different slopes. Resonance again is self-oscillating. So if I turn all of the oscillators off, turn the resonance up. And you've got your keyboard tracking button, so without it, no matter where you play on the keyboard, it will be the same, which is good for percussive sounds when you're making, you know, certain sounds like snares. You don't want them to change in pitch, but you want to do the roll. But if you want to add the pitching, you add the keyboard tracking to the filter. And that of course gives you your sine wave. Anyway, moving on, you've got a filter envelope and an amplitude envelope, and they're multi-trigger envelopes as well, so you've got different options on there. I'm going to run you through it now. As I said earlier on, this filter envelope again can be used in conjunction with the modulation slots when you use the FEG option here. So remember that, it gets you creative using that to kind of modulate those. So attack, decay, sustain, release. For the filter, underneath that you've got a multi-trigger. When you click on that, you can use the delay button. There's another button underneath that. When you activate this multi-trigger, it took me a while to work it out. You clicked on the multi-trigger and that activates this lower panel down here. So now we can delay in by using these same controls. So now I'm delaying when the filter comes in by using that delay on the filter by using the multi-trig. We've got a reset, which will reset the filter every time you hit a key, which is, you know, great again for different basses and stuff like that, basses and percussive sounds. we've also got a sync, which will sync the arpeggios, because these can be looped, these envelopes. So it moves me on to the next little option here, which is loop. And you've got the looping on the amp as well, so if we loop that as well. So you can kind of get some interesting effects using that. Again, when we've got the multi-trig button option, you get to do the keyboard tracking and the velocity amount using the sustain and the release. So remember that you have to put the multi-trig button on to access those options there. Same with the multi-trig in the amplitude envelope here. So you can get into audio rates with that, and it can become another LFO. So yeah, that's your envelopes there. You've got your output section next to that. Now again, you know, really good. I had a little complaint, as I said, about the Moog Matriarch. The headphone was on the back, it had a tiny little dial on it. This has got the headphone on the front. It's got a separate amplifier for your headphone and the volume, which is really cool. You know, there's no expense spared on this, to be fair. Anyway, so that's it really for the video. I'm going to give you a few sound examples now. And yeah, hope you enjoy the video.